Initially conceived during a period of great competition in the first-person shooter space, Red Faction had its work cut out for it long before entering the spotlight. Developer Volition Inc. harbored dreams that ventured far beyond simply adding another Quake-like shooter to the pile, though. Advanced destructible environments and intense vehicular combat were positioned as the differentiating factors between Red Faction and nearly everything else available for PC and console. And despite launching in 2001 to tepid reception, the Volition-developed FPS title set quite the precedent. Commercially, Red Faction secured its place as publisher THQ's top-selling franchise until another Volition property, Saints Row, stole the crown. Such success begat a few sequels, spin-offs, and even a TV movie. Improved technology along with the open-world structure of Red Faction Guerrilla introduced a new level of destruction and reinvigorated excitement for the brand. But victories of this caliber were squandered 2 years later when a shocking case of regression engendered a return to linearity in Armageddon that few wanted. All in all, Red Faction sits atop a lengthy list of PS2-era franchises that never found their footing. It didn't help that Volition's parent company long struggled to keep itself afloat amid financial woes and industry changes, ultimately culminating in bankruptcy. Still, the road that led to Red Faction fading into obscurity may not be as straightforward as it once seemed. This is the rise and fall of Red Faction. This video has been brought to you in part by Software Keep. Trying to navigate the digital world with outdated software? It's like sending a carrier pigeon in the age of emails. Thanks to Software Keep, we can keep our digital life as smooth as butter on a hot griddle and scam-free to boot. Counterfeit or dated software jeopardizes your security, data, and legal standing. That's why Software Keep emerged with a clear mission: to arm you with the digital tools you need for success at prices that challenge the norm. And this back-to-school season, Software Keep is here to elevate your academic experience by providing you with top-tier, genuine software solutions and irresistible deals you simply can't afford to miss. Never run into those pesky last-minute issues that can cost you a grade or a deadline that are all too common with unlicensed programs again. And take your pick from an impressive and affordable lineup of authentic software, including Windows 11 Pro, MS Office 2019 Home and Student, Microsoft Office 2021 Home and Business, and Windows 10. Don't wait, follow the link in our description to see all the amazing deals Software Keep has to offer. And use our unique coupon at the checkout for an amazing discount. We'd like to thank Software Keep for sponsoring this video.
All the stuff I did in class, was fairly interesting. But really what I wanted to do was make games. There were probably some people selling games on the Apple II, the Atari, I think the 400 and the 800. They were 6502 based, so very primitive machines.
The building blocks of Volition Inc. date back to 1993 when programmers Mike Kulas and Matt Toshlog established Parallax Software in Champaign, Illinois. Descent constituted Parallax's breakout game, placing players in the role of a spaceship pilot from a first-person perspective. Together, the Kulas and Toshlog-founded group produced 2 Descent entries, the second launching on PC 1 year before the founding members split the company in half. The division happened courtesy of Descent 2's unexpected success and Toshlog's desire to leave Champaign. Kulas remained in Illinois, rebranding Parallax as Volition Inc. and setting to work on the space combat sim Descent Free Space: The Great War. Meanwhile, a number of employees followed Toshlog to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he set up shop under the name Outrage Entertainment and began production on Descent 3. Descent's third mainline title arrived in 1999 to little fanfare and sold below expectations. Regardless, Volition already had plans for a 4th installment. The pitch imagined a prequel in which users assumed control of a character as opposed to a spaceship. then navigated a world replete with destructible environments. Descent 4 never saw the light of day, however. Without sharing specifics, Mike Koulos told fan site Planet Descent in 2000 that the Descent 4 Volition wanted to create wasn't an option, hinting the developers had no say in the matter. Studio veteran Alan Lawrence offered more insight in a Eurogamer interview, recalling how the market had changed by the time Descent 4 entered early development. Joysticks were being replaced by mouse and keyboard on PC. Thus, Descent as an IP suddenly didn't feel strong enough to warrant another sequel. The third game's failure reinforced this notion, especially for series publisher Interplay Entertainment, which was in the throes of financial difficulties. Speaking with Game Informer for The Secret History of Volition Inc., Koulos divulged that Interplay's uncertainty about the future of Descent forced Volition to alter course, as the former's publishing rights wouldn't allow the creative team to take the property elsewhere. Still believing destructibility held plenty of promise, the crew continued down this particular route while keeping in mind the character-centric first-person shooter concept. Out of the ashes left behind by the canceled Descent 4, rose Red Faction.
Against the wall, and again, geometry can be modified anywhere I shoot this rocket. Anywhere the designer's flag is modifiable is indeed modifiable. This is all done in real time. Nothing here is scripted at all. You can see that the particles here are reacting to the modified geometry. So one of the highlights of Red Faction is the way the particle system operates. And here you can see we have support for steam. And the steam is reacting to the environment as it flows out.
Volition initiated pre-production on what would become Red Faction in June 1998. The same year, Unreal and Half-Life debuted. Well aware of the FPS genre's constant evolution, Red Faction creators felt they needed to double down on fully destructible structures. True innovation was the goal, and though a lot of the tech originally meant for Descent 4 found its way into Red Faction, Mike Koulos denied fan theories suggesting Volition had recycled the old engine. According to lead designer Alan Lawrence, plans of building an entirely new engine cropped up early on, with developers realizing existing tech couldn't support their ambitious vision. To facilitate the havoc players would wreak across Red Faction's playground, Volition created Geometry Modification, or GeoMod for short, a name which aptly conveyed its purpose of modifying geometry in real time. The engine's architects soon concluded that making every wall and structure destructible wasn't the least bit feasible since it presented too many unsolvable technical challenges. GeoMod tech instead featured limited physics support, a compromise further necessitated by the shooter's linearity funneling players in certain directions and leaving little room for freedom. Despite efforts to pare down GeoMod's proposed capabilities, technical issues reared their heads in unexpected ways. For example, the team struggled with rendering the world at a fast enough pace because of an inability to pre-compute visibility. AI proved equally problematic, given that pathfinding for enemies couldn't function without considering whatever damage users may have caused to walls and other surrounding structures. The fact that the ruinous behaviors of players could so easily break the game's scripting resulted in more than a fair few design headaches, too. Nevertheless, Volition's GeoMod accomplishments were impressive. The fully functional physics system permitted unprecedented destruction, such that the accompanying actions impacted the game world. Whereas bullet holes in other titles were represented with decals, Red Faction's bullets tore noticeable holes in nearby walls. This attention to details similarly affected the moment-to-moment action. Firing enough shots at a guard tower support beams, for instance, could send the structure tumbling down, killing anyone inside or beneath it. GeoMod's physics applications also accounted for locational damage, ensuring that enemies reacted accordingly when struck on certain parts of their bodies. Of course, the possibilities were far from limitless. Metal-lined walls prevented players from shooting their way out of levels. Concrete, reinforced steel doors, and solid rock further hindered progress in many cases. But developers had other aces up their sleeves. Inventive gameplay mechanics designed to further amplify the action beyond the FPS aspect. Combining ground-based first-person action with drivable vehicles marked another Red Faction innovation. Games hadn't enjoyed much luck on this front in the past, though the likes of Redline and Codename Eagle symbolized admirable attempts. Red Faction, on the other hand, produced Carmageddon-style chaos, allowing players to run over their foes and shoot at them while behind the wheel. And the wealth of vehicles made such gameplay all the more exhilarating, ranging from hover fighters and armored trucks to one-man subs and drillers. These development efforts persisted unabated for approximately 2 years before a major corporate shift forced Volition to broaden its horizons and tamp down on some proposed technical feats. Yet, the behind-the-scenes changes additionally guaranteed Red Faction's genre-defining experience would leave an indelible mark on the future of console gaming.
And sequence 2 in 3, 2, 1, mark.
After the first Free Space, Volition moved forward with 4 separate games: Free Space 2, Descent 4, the canceled Tube Racer project, and Summoner. The latter represented Volition's first foray into RPGs, yet Interplay harbored little interest given its own slate of role-playing titles. Shopping around for another publishing partner put the studio directly in THQ's path. The California-based publishing house had a reputation for shipping licensed games, but fell in love with Summoner and agreed to help Volition bring its vision to market. THQ so valued the budding relationship that it acquired the Summoner team on August 31, 2000, 2 months ahead of the project's October arrival as a PlayStation 2 launch title. From the outside looking in, it made sense for Red Faction to serve as another of Volition's console adventures, yet the shooter was built from the ground up for PC. It turned into a PS2 game at THQ's behest, requiring the studio to significantly alter its PC-centric codebase so the software would competently function on PlayStation hardware. Lead designer Alan Lawrence recalled one complication during a sit-down with Eurogamer, noting that standard dynamic memory allocations were wiped from the codebase because it was too slow and could lead to running out of memory on consoles with fixed RAM. Though manageable, this time-consuming process delayed Red Faction's release on at least one occasion. As Mike Kulas told it, the push came about 2 weeks before the game's submission deadline. The crew had exhausted itself up until that point, having overhauled the technology for console while also experimenting with new ideas, many of which never made the cut. Fortunately, THQ provided a 2-month extension. For all parties involved, the publisher's unwavering faith in the then nascent property would pay dividends. Not everyone shared such optimism. Kulas divulged that several Red Faction developers thought very little of the shooter, thinking it a trivial replacement for the project they actually wanted to build. Descent 4. Regardless, interesting ideas spawned from the group as a whole. The size of Volition meant all staff members consulted on nearly every aspect of development, creative and otherwise. As an example, narrative designer Mike Bro penned the story, though multiple staffers shared the responsibility of fleshing out specifics. Red Faction's premise centered on Parker, a miner lured to Mars by ultra-capitalist corporation Ultor's promise of good pay. Shortly after landing on the Red Planet, however, Parker witnessed the corporation's guards brutally kill a fellow miner. The exploited workers answered the injustice with an uprising. Despite the plot's striking similarities to the Arnold Schwarzenegger starring Total Recall film, Alan Lawrence claimed it never came up as a point of inspiration during production. Apparently, the team didn't realize the shared setting and themes until much later. Players and critics spotted the parallels, though, with several reviews calling attention to them without fail. But when push came to shove, the game's budding community especially glommed onto the gameplay and groundbreaking destruction mechanics. THQ shipped Red Faction on the PlayStation 2 in May 2001, its PC port releasing later that same year. Mostly above-average reviews for the PS2 version applauded the pioneering, albeit minimally used, geomod technology and lauded Volition for crafting a first-person shooter that felt good to play on a controller. The latter compliment was due in part to Red Faction counting among the first FPS titles to utilize dual analog sticks on console. Many considered its multiplayer package respectable at best, lacking the attractive features of its contemporaries yet giving players enough incentive to return. The same held true of the gameplay in general, which, outside of its destructive capabilities, did little to stand apart from the wealth of first-person shooters already available. While the PC iteration fared better on most fronts, it too suffered from more or less providing a run-of-the-mill experience. Interestingly, some critics argued the heavy emphasis on the narrative didn't do Red Faction any favors, particularly with respect to the story campaign's anticlimactic final act. Alan Lawrence later agreed with these sentiments, going so far as to label the narrative an exercise in excessiveness. Lawrence attributed some of the shortcomings to Volition's small size and budget restrictions, and insisted the team dreamed of introducing more features. But each edition would have required time and resources they couldn't afford, which also explained Red Faction's absence on GameCube and Xbox platforms, since the studio had no access to the cross-platform technology necessary for such an undertaking. Technical constraints and setbacks aside, Volition still delivered an adventure that raised the bar for destruction in games, so much so that even naysayers were curious about where Red Faction would head next.
It was two different studios. So, Descent 3 got very strong reviews and did not sell very well, unfortunately, and then Interplay didn't really want to do Descent 4. And we had a contract to do Descent 4, and I guess the role-playing game would have been an Interplay title. But at that same time, I think Interplay was...
Studio co-founder Mike Koulas spoke as candidly as he could about Descent 4's termination during an interview with Planet Descent months ahead of Red Faction's initial release. The site relayed the general disappointment among fans who harbored no interest in the new shooter, as they would have much preferred another sequel to their favorite shoot-'em-up. But clearly Descent's influence on Red Faction won over a significant portion of Volition's longtime supporters, considering it sold more than 1 million units across PS2 and PC in less than a year. THQ president and CEO Brian Farrell dubbed it an overwhelming success, one the publisher quickly wanted to follow up with a sequel. In January 2002 then, mere months after the PC port released for Windows, the companies unveiled Red Faction 2 and dated it for a winter 2002 rollout on Sony's second home console. The press release accompanying the announcement boasted of a sequel that would build upon the experience and technology of the original game. Koulas similarly teased a shooter primed to take the action genre to new heights, with innovations in technology and game design, a gripping storyline, enhanced geomod engine, and refined enemy AI additionally garnered mention. Meanwhile, the crew at Volition was fast at work trying to turn the colorful marketing speak into reality. Lead programmer Alan Lawrence explained in a making-of featurette that Volition's mostly rewritten geomod engine gave developers license to go above and beyond the previous entry. Most notably, the improved technology had a better grasp of the PS2's hardware, thereby opening the door for enhanced effects, refined graphics, higher frame rates, motion capture animation, and faster loading times. Enemy AI received a much-needed overhaul as well, allowing for teamwork and self-preservation tactics like retreating and taking over. Of course, the more significant geomod enhancements were applied to the destruction-based elements. Red Faction 2 thus promoted a completely interactive game world that divested from the static environments and typical first-person shooters of the day. To this end, Volition made sure destructive mechanics became an integral part of gameplay, increasing the number of ways that users could approach any given situation by littering playspaces with as many destructibility opportunities as possible. Such post-Red Faction 1 thinking gained emphasis as developers focused on making players feel as if anything they set their eye on could be torn apart, including trivial objects such as barrels and lampposts. The wide-spanning geomod advancements were essentially broken into 3 layers, the first being surface-level impressions, scorch marks, bullet holes, and so forth. Destructible objects like the aforementioned barrels and lampposts occupied the second layer. Beyond that, the revamped engine's more intensive properties facilitated combat strategies and puzzle solving. With the technology locked in, the Red Faction 2 team entered the design phase, hashing out how best to proceed with the plot, characters, and level design. Producer James Sy noted in a 2001 Red Faction Center interview that the first game's story stemmed from several science fiction and fantasy influences paired with real-world research before the developers balanced those ideas with what made for the most exciting experience. The mining atmosphere spawned from it, theoretically providing the perfect geomod showcase, while the Mars setting permitted the implementation of more futuristic and otherworldly elements. In behind-the-scenes footage, lead style and effects artist Frank Capizzuto claimed Volition aimed to explore a completely different direction for Red Faction 2, despite Earth serving as the playground. Research for the project initially inspired an Art Deco-leaning design style, though further iteration encouraged the blending together of 2 disparate art styles. According to Capizzuto, South American and futuristic art, mixed with a slight blend of Mediterranean architecture, anchored the look of the sequel's structures and environments. The aesthetic also borrowed from the Blade Runner school of design, retrofitting older structures in a manner that wouldn't make the audience feel too disconnected from the 22nd century setting. Volition placed extra emphasis on storytelling the second go-around because of a determination to build an immersive experience. The follow-up took place on Earth 5 years after the Mars Rebellion and positioned players in the boots of nanotech-enhanced soldier, alias Burke. Working alongside an elite squad of fellow soldiers, Burke had one mission: oust the merciless dictator Chancellor Sopat. An interesting cast of characters formed around the protagonist too, thanks in no small part to the hired voice talent. Veteran actor Lance Henriksen of Aliens and Terminator fame portrayed Squad Commander Moloff, while action star Jason Statham lent his voice to super soldier Mandrel Shrike. Lead designer Nathan Camarillo argued that such talent would land Volition on the cutting edge of a trend wherein Hollywood actors were appearing more often in video games. Casting decisions aside, players would be most interested in how the franchise's myriad technical and design changes affected the in-game action. Settling on realistic environments, weapons, and vehicles with a futuristic twist gave way to designers receiving an added level of creative freedom. It resulted in a host of possibilities not seen in the game's predecessor. Gone were the standard firearms present in most first-person shooters, replaced by a nanotech-enhanced arsenal that proved more lethal than anything in Red Faction's first outing. Volition's revised design philosophy further influenced the introduction of dual wielding. Players could equip a grenade in their offhand while wielding a gun in the other, for example. Simultaneously brandishing two firearms constituted another option. And since gameplay improvements on top of the various geomod advancements were all geared toward bettering the Red Faction formula, Volition didn't waste an opportunity to expand upon its multiplayer suite. The shooter boasted 4-player split screen, doubling the number of users previously supported. Offline multiplayer hosted upwards of 6 users, though there was only enough space for 4 real players and 2 AI-driven bots. The studio stepped up its game in terms of multiplayer modes as well, which came in the form of Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, a Last Man Standing type mode named Arena, the tag-inspired Bagman offering, and more. Ultimately, these efforts amounted to middling reception. Red Faction 2 hit PS2 in October 2002, then migrated to GameCube, PC, and Xbox the next year. Reviews indicated the sequel couldn't hold a candle to its predecessor. Most critics labeled it a decent enough shooter, one unlikely to leave an impression but good enough for mindless fun. The single-player campaign, judged as too linear and far too short, proved moderately interesting courtesy of the intense gameplay and intriguing characters, though a rash of cliches and lack of engaging storytelling left much to be desired. Offline bot matches marginally added lasting value, yet few saw a reason to stick around long-term without true online multiplayer. Fickle enemy AI and Geomod's inconsistent destructibility parameters also made it difficult for many to recommend the title at full price. At the very least, Volition's engine upgrades were considered worthy of praise. But the divisiveness sunk in rapidly, enough so that Volition and THQ questioned their next steps. In a Game Informer sit-down in 2011, Mike Koulos recalled his development team's disappointment at the lower-than-expected reviews. The crew believed the second outing surpassed the original several times over. Thus, the lore within the company condemned Red Faction 2 as a failure that killed the franchise. THQ agreed to an extent. Though production on Red Faction 3 had begun in some capacity, the publisher's marketing bosses told Volition the series needed a rest. Hence the IP laying dormant for 7 years until Red Faction Guerrilla's arrival in 2009. The Illinois-based firm kept busy during the lengthy period between Red Faction's death and revival. Summoner 3 also fell to the cutting room floor in the early aughts. Its production team moved on to Underground, a passion project and heist game set in a pseudo-open world that didn't contain enough GTA 3-esque qualities for the marketing department's liking. To Volition's disappointment, Underground lasted no more than 12 months in development. THQ proposed the 2005 Punisher game not long thereafter. Saints Row and Saints Row 2 subsequently released in 2006 and 2008, their commercial success turning the open-world franchise into THQ's new flagship IP. Yet it wouldn't be long before Red Faction once more enjoyed its time in the spotlight. Oddly enough, Red Faction almost resurfaced before the third mainline entry hit stores. Leaked details concerning an unannounced Wii game entitled Red Faction B.E.A.S.T made the rounds in January 2009. Locomotive Games, best known for Destroy All Humans, Big Willie Unleashed, spearheaded the Gears of War-like third-person shooter. Prototype footage showcasing the over-the-shoulder action, character renders, and animations constituted the only evidence of the game's existence, circulating online months after THQ shuttered Locomotive and other internal studios due to corporate restructuring. By this juncture, the crew at Volition was putting finishing touches on Red Faction Guerilla, a brand relaunch that reimagined how destruction worked in interactive media. Such efforts were kickstarted years prior in 2004. Design director James Haig claimed in a developer diary that while the first two Red Factions pushed the gaming hardware of the day to its limits, series creators envisioned destruction on a grander scale than the technology allowed. Geomod 1.0 emphasized terrain deformation and blasting holes in walls, an experience wherein users could tear down whole structures and buildings piece by piece marked the next evolutionary step. Learning of the PS3's and Xbox 360's capabilities encouraged Volition to take said step by resurrecting Red Faction with Geomod 2.0. Most of the franchise's contemporaries relied on special effects when destabilizing game worlds. For Guerrilla, Volition developed a true physics-based and stress-based destruction system in pursuit of realism not yet seen in video games. In-game buildings were designed to spec with real materials and weight in mind, ensuring they creaked under stress and tumbled down in accordance with locational damage. Lead developers insisted the feat required select staffers to familiarize themselves with structural engineering. Architects consulted on interior and exterior design, guaranteeing Geomod 2.0 followed a series of physical rules. So intricate was the technology that art director Jason Whiteside said users would find buildings easier to tear down if explosive charges were attached in the right spots for optimal structural damage. The intricacies didn't stop there. Senior associate producer Jeff Carroll described the 2.0 engine's active stress system while speaking with true gameheads. It worked such that blasting away at parts of a structure resulted in the full structure collapsing slowly over time. This level of destructibility required players to remain mindful of their surroundings, lest stray bits of debris fall from above and kill the playable hero instantaneously. Developers recalled instant death mishaps directly influencing Red Faction's switch from first to third person. Associate producer Sean Kennedy divulged Red Faction Guerrilla's path to third-person action in a 2009 interview with Video Gamer, telling the publication the shooter had been a first-person adventure when he joined Volition in 2006. Because Geomod 2.0 turned everything to rubble, developers realized players would struggle to spot debris falling from above, a product of the limited vision the first-person perspective affords. An attempt at alleviating the problem manifested in an experiment one weekend, wherein the camera was pulled back, providing a full over-the-shoulder view of the main character and his surroundings. Kennedy remembered the night and day difference, immediately feeling more satisfying. The destructibility changes additionally influenced the move away from linearity and into an open-world setting. As Kennedy explained, the sense of freedom that destruction lent perfectly befit the context of a larger playground. And as a result, every activity and mission was fueled by the havoc users could wreak across the game world, with each action driven by a narrative that returned Red Faction to its roots and established a fresh start. Red Faction 2 sold and reviewed well enough but couldn't compete with its predecessor. Kennedy attributed the sequel's comparatively low fanfare to the fact that it offered such a contrasting experience given its setting on Earth instead of Mars. Consequently, Red Faction 2's story bore no influence over the events of Guerrilla, which Volition labeled the true successor to the 2001 title. The first game ended with the Earth Defense Force, or EDF, aiding the Red Faction in overthrowing the oppressive Ultor Corporation. Guerrilla picked up 5 decades later, revealing the EDF as yet another tyrannical force that laid claim to the resource-rich Red Planet, then subjugated all inhabitants under martial law. Players assumed the role of a Che Guevara-inspired guerrilla leader, Alec Mason, who slowly rose from the ranks throughout the story campaign. Jeff Carroll said the character archetype stemmed from the studio not wanting to immediately launch users into superhero status. Everything had to be earned, including the trust of civilians who could join the guerrilla effort via a newly introduced morale system. In a sea of open-world games, Carroll argued that Guerrilla's morale feature set it apart from the competition. The Mars-based sandbox played host to optional missions involving civilians stuck in various situations. Some side quests tasked the protagonist with leading offensive raids against the EDF. Others presented challenges in the form of hostage rescue operations. Each voluntary activity increased morale and, in turn, precipitated the growth of the guerrilla movement. Volition intertwined gameplay and morale to motivate users to play strategically versus the overwhelming military force from the start. If these systems were carefully balanced, more fighters would enter the ranks as the game progressed, making the ongoing battle against the EDF comparatively manageable. Upon joining the cause, the recruited civilians could take up arms to assist players or even initiate firefights themselves. Suffice it to say, Guerrilla made for an experience unlike the Red Faction of old. Changing the generally well-loved multiplayer suite hardly seemed necessary, though. Understanding that the first installment still enjoyed a sizable online player base kept Volition from tinkering too much. However, Guerrilla's robust multiplayer did fully integrate the Geomod 2.0 destruction elements, the biggest differentiator between it and the online packages featured in popular first-person shooters. 16 player matches, 6 game modes, and the Wrecking Crew Party mode rounded out the title's non-campaign offerings. Little did Volition developers know, their endeavor to revive Red Faction for new-gen hardware would enjoy great returns. On February 6, 2008, THQ CEO Brian Farrell disclosed in a financial call that the long-dormant Red Faction IP would return during the following fiscal year. The publisher officially unveiled Red Faction Guerrilla 2 days later, detailing the open world, a cover system that facilitated guerrilla-style tactics, and the switch to the third-person perspective. Its June 2009 launch on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, followed by the PC port's arrival in September, ultimately proved the extended hiatus was just what the doctor ordered. Ignoring the PS2 version of the original, Guerrilla quickly earned the crown of Red Faction's best-reviewed entry. Critics and players pleased with the dynamic destruction capabilities of Geomod 2.0 also applauded the freedom the open-ended gameplay permitted. The campaign and numerous missions encompassing it garnered high marks as well. Multiplayer extended the thrill in its own right, and the Wrecking Crew mode eventually received post-launch support that kept players invested. Progression needed work, and the occasional technical hiccup indicated Guerrilla lacked polish, but by most accounts, Red Faction was back and better than ever. Guerrilla's acclaim helped boost its commercial gains too. Volition's return to the Red Planet moved over 1 million units in roughly a month, an accomplishment Farrell proudly touted as demonstrative of THQ's commitment to quality. That much would be called into question upon Red Faction Armageddon's 2011 debut.
Darius, this is your situational awareness module. Are you still functional?
Armageddon afforded Volition the opportunity to once again re-examine the core tenets of Red Faction, which meant reverting to previously abandoned design philosophies. Instead of expanding upon sandbox gameplay, the team revisited linear corridor shooter mechanics. The narrative similarly regained a central focus and dictated its share of critical design choices. Meanwhile, multiplayer took a stranger turn, the competitive element shelved in favor of cooperative modes. Limited resources seemingly governed the do's and don'ts of Armageddon's development cycle. After all, its production coincided with that of Saints Row III, the more fiscally important project that ran on another of Volition's proprietary game engines, Core Technology Group. Evidently, only so many resources could be spared for the next Red Faction, but a few developers provided other explanations for why Armageddon bore all the hallmarks of a regression from Guerrilla. Art director Jason Whiteside attributed the return of linearity to a renewed investment in centralizing the story, telling GameZone that true immersion proved difficult in Guerrilla's open world because users could engage with the sandbox so freely. By the studio's summation, the previous installment lacked character depth for the protagonist. The enemies didn't fare any better and hardly elevated the overarching narrative. Armageddon veered in the opposite direction by exploring a new enemy force, abilities, and weapons, all of which gradually peeled back the layers of the main character, Darius Mason, grandson to Guerrilla hero Alec Mason. Linear gameplay benefited Volition's updated Geomod 2.0 as well, though engine upgrades between Guerrilla and Armageddon were modest. Studio manager Eric Barker argued the former never put destruction at the forefront, while the latter did so with its integration of physics-based weaponry like the Singularity Cannon. Nanoforge abilities likewise turned destruction on its head. No ability demonstrated this notion better than the repair function, whose activation could rebuild anything a player tore apart and carve out new pathways. Barker said the repair ability exemplified the destruction system's next step and prompted users to consider every possible outcome when making decisions. The multiplayer suite especially suffered a reduction in scale, with the absence of deathmatch later becoming a sore spot for fans and developers. Competitive options entered the conversation during development, then quickly fell by the wayside once developers concluded that anything less than an extremely good mode wasn't worth the effort. The project's relatively short production time and limited headcount further fueled the notion that building cooperative and leaderboard challenge modes were the optimum path forward. In lieu of competitive gameplay, Volition drafted a multiplayer experience that complemented the single-player campaign. Infestation mode, in particular, offered a parallel storyline that reinforced the idea of humanity fighting to safeguard Mars from the otherworldly creatures ripping it apart. Interestingly enough, these self-same creatures held the key to other fundamental Red Faction changes. Armageddon represented one part of a brand expansion and cohesive initiative. Days before the shooter's June 2011 street date, the Sci-Fi Channel premiered Red Faction Origins, a live-action TV movie and backdoor pilot which laid the foundations for a television series that never developed past the ideation phase. Written by TV veteran Andrew Kreisberg, who later executive produced the CW Zeroverse shows, Origins followed Guerrilla protagonist Alec Mason and his kids Jake and Lyra, 25 years after the Resistance freed Mars. This period in the Red Faction timeline split the difference between the two 7th-gen entries, with Armageddon focalizing Jake's son Darius, half a century after the events of Guerrilla. Told across 3 generations of the Mason family, this multi-generational saga painted an epic tale that picked up on TV with Origins and came to a close in Armageddon. But much about Mars had changed in universe during the intervening years. Because of a cataclysmic incident that made the planet's surface uninhabitable, all colonists were moved underground where Darius would eventually unleash a long dormant evil. His mistake resulted in Armageddon in the form of a widespread alien infestation. Humanity's survival on Mars thus hinged on how well the young man could stave off the unspeakable threat. The insect-like alien enemies mixed up the Red Faction status quo considerably. Their erratic behavior encouraged a shift in enemy AI that would not have come to pass with human foes. The aliens further provided a purpose for Armageddon's nanoforge abilities and engendered a need for players to adjust how they typically played the shooter series. And the threat the creatures posed with their civilization-destroying infestations inspired developers to table the morale system introduced in Guerrilla. As lead-level designer Jameson Doral noted, all bets were off. The days of considering whether or not to lay waste to certain buildings and objects had become a thing of the past. With infestations breaking down building materials into minerals that nourished the alien swarms, all-out destruction suddenly became both a fun facet of gameplay and a necessity embedded in the storytelling. Leading up to E3 2010, THQ and Volition announced Red Faction Armageddon for PC, PS3, and Xbox 360. A trailer premiered during a Games Trailer TV segment teasing the cataclysmic accident that had gravely destabilized the surface of Mars. The bland environments in Guerrilla were replaced by various locales below the ground, ranging from lava tubes to ice-filled caverns. Initially slated for March 2011, Armageddon wouldn't touch down until that June. Between those dates came another Red Faction adventure, Battlegrounds, which bridged the gap between the 2009 and 2011 installments. The twin-stick vehicular shooter came to fruition at THQ Digital Studios UK, launching across PSN, and Xbox Live, and chiefly constituting a promo tool where fans could unlock content for the upcoming sequel. It didn't review well, but Armageddon picked up the slack months later. Red Faction's final 7th-gen entry earned favorable review scores. Some critics and players thought it superior to its immediate predecessor. Others considered it an unimaginative step backwards. Though the destruction, weapons, nanoforge abilities, and co-op modes kept things intriguing, the lackluster story and characters interrupted the momentum on occasion. The promise of varied play spaces fell short as well, given that many reviews slammed Armageddon's repetitive levels. Guerrilla remained the cream of the crop for Red Faction, and the sales data reflected as much. THQ boss Brian Farrell lamented in a July 2011 earnings report that Armageddon had sold below expectations. The publisher partly attributed its net loss of $38.4 million in the quarter ending on June 30th to the title's disappointing performance. But Red Faction's failings comprised a small piece of a larger problem for the mid-tier publishing house. In January 2012, following a string of commercial upsets, THQ streamlined the company by shifting attention away from children's licensed games to focus on core and digital projects, primarily planting its flag on the back of Saints Row III's astronomical success. Corporate shuffling trailed the restructuring mere months later, as 2 core games executives left, and Naughty Dog co-founder Jason Rubin filled in as president. These last-ditch efforts to save the languishing publisher made no difference in the short or long term, however. THQ filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in December 2012, a declaration that gave the company one final fighting chance while it sold out to a single bidder, Clear Lake Capital Group. Assets were auctioned off in January 2013, going to interested parties such as Sega, Take-Two Interactive, and Ubisoft. Deep Silver label Koch Media purchased Volition for $23 million. THQ Nordic, which acquired the THQ trademark in 2014, bought out Koch Media in early 2018. Not too long thereafter, Red Faction underwent yet another resurrection. Official details about a remaster of Guerrilla hit the web in March 2018 before landing in stores for PC, PS4, and Xbox One that July. A Nintendo Switch port launched to mixed reviews in 2019. The remaster added nothing new barring an extra coat of paint, yet amplified what fans loved nearly 10 years prior. THQ Nordic never disclosed sales data, so there's no hint as to whether the franchise's brief return helped secure its future. But a glimmer of hope sparkled in 2020 when THQ Nordic transferred the Red Faction rights to Koch Media amid an IP swap. The deal between the 2 Embracer Group subsidiaries placed the property 1 degree closer to its original creators at Volition. A brief period of speculation regarding the series' future ensued, when a statement from THQ Nordic about the trade noted that evaluations on remasters, ports, potential sequels, and new content would soon get underway. Unfortunately, all hopes came crashing down on the 31st of August, 2023, when Embracer closed Volition as part of a restructuring program just over a year after the debut of a divisive and commercially unsuccessful Saints Row reboot. As a consequence, if and when the series does make a comeback, its original studio won't sit at the helm. Not unlike the cold desert world on which most of its entries were set, Red Faction continues to lie dormant. Any anticipation for its once hopeful revival now dried up. Still, the technological advancements achieved since Armageddon's 2011 release arguably warrant another Red Faction adventure and geomod overhaul to re-examine the industry standard for destruction. Even the brand's closest competitors, Just Cause and Mercenaries, have faded into obscurity, leaving a sizable hole in a corner of the market previously occupied by a select few. Perhaps another trip to the Red Planet is what's necessary to raise the bar yet again. Thank you for watching. We'd like to take this time to thank, by name, the generous patrons who have pledged to our Hall of Fame reward tier: Alex Moretti, and those currently subscribed to our producer reward tier: Brock Piviroto, Darirap Sigurdsson, GetWrecked.com, Jonathan, Kira May, Landy K. Hayes, Mario Herrera, Milkshake. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to our channel and backing us on Patreon.